The moment I saw my blood type results staring back at me from my phone screen, I knew my parents had been living a lie for 23 years. I'm Mariel Smith, and for the past 4 years, I'd been giving my blood to my sister Violet every single week. The same sister who treated me like her personal servant, who made me feel invisible in my own family. But the real gut punch? A DNA test just proved we're not even related. Have you ever discovered that everything you believed about your family was built on deception? That the people who raised you had been using you as a human blood bank for someone who wasn't even your sister? I'm sitting here in my cramped studio apartment in Millbrook Heights, Oregon, staring at the small bandage on my inner arm where they drew blood just yesterday. Tuesday mornings at 8 a.m. sharp, that had been my routine for 4 years. Every week, without fail, I'd drive the 30 minutes to Riverside Medical Center, roll up my sleeve, and let them drain a pint of my O-negative blood. Liquid gold, the nurses called it. Universal donor, the kind that could save anyone's life. What they didn't tell me was that it was only saving one person's life, and that person had been lying to me about who she really was this entire time. The whole thing started when I was 19, fresh out of high school and working at a coffee shop in downtown Millbrook. Violet had just turned 24, already climbing the corporate ladder at some fancy marketing firm in Portland. She'd always been the golden child. Straight A's, perfect attendance, the daughter who could do no wrong in our parents' eyes. I was the afterthought, the one who struggled through school, who never quite measured up to her impossible standards. That summer, Violet got sick, really sick. Some rare blood disorder called hereditary spherocytosis, a condition I'd never heard of, but that apparently required regular blood transfusions to keep her alive. It runs in families, Dr. Patterson explained during that first meeting at the hospital. Lucky for Violet, Mariel's blood is a perfect match. Perfect match? Those words should have been my first red flag. Our parents, Harold and Catherine Smith, made it sound so noble, so heroic. "You're saving your sister's life," Mom would say, her hand squeezing my shoulder with practiced warmth. "This is what family does for each other." Dad would nod approvingly from behind his newspaper, occasionally looking up to add, "We're so proud of you, sweetheart." But Violet never looked proud. She looked entitled, like my blood was something she deserved, something that belonged to her. During those early weeks, when I was still scared and confused about the whole process, she'd pat my head like I was a golden retriever who'd performed a good trick. "Thanks, little sis," she'd say with that condescending smile I knew so well. "Don't know what I'd do without you." The answer to that question, I now realize, was simple. She would have died. But she wasn't my sister, so why did it have to be my problem? For 4 years, I built my entire life around those Tuesday morning appointments. I couldn't take jobs that required early shifts. I couldn't go out on Monday nights because I needed to be well-rested and hydrated. I couldn't travel, couldn't move away for college, couldn't live my own life because Violet needed me to stay close, to stay available, to stay useful. "It's temporary," Mom kept saying, "just until we find a more permanent solution." But months turned into years, and the more permanent solution never came. Instead, the donations became routine, expected, non-negotiable. If I ever tried to push back, even gently, the guilt trips would start immediately. "Violet's depending on you," Dad would say, his voice heavy with disappointment. "You wouldn't want something to happen to her because you were being selfish, would you?" Selfish. That word followed me everywhere. Selfish for wanting to take a weekend trip with friends. Selfish for considering a job in another city. Selfish for asking if maybe, just maybe, there were other donors who could help shoulder this burden. "Blood donation isn't a burden, Mariel," Mom would snap. "It's a blessing. Not everyone gets the chance to literally keep their sister alive." But here's the thing about being someone's literal lifeline. It makes you disappear. My wants, my needs, my dreams, all became secondary to Violet's survival. I was 23 years old and felt like I'd never lived a single day for myself. The breaking point came 3 weeks ago. I'd been feeling run down, exhausted all the time, and my doctor suggested some routine blood work. Just to make sure all this donating isn't taking too much of a toll, she said kindly. But when the results came back, something was off. My blood markers were fine, but my blood type results didn't match what I'd been told my entire life. Are you sure I'm O negative? I asked the lab technician, a woman named Rita with graying eyes and kind hair. She double-checked the paperwork, then looked at me with confusion. Honey, you're A positive. Have been your whole life. These results don't lie. That's when everything started unraveling. If I was A positive, how had I been the perfect match for Violet's O negative blood type? How had 4 years of blood transfusions not killed her? How had every medical professional involved in this process missed such a fundamental incompatibility? The answer was simple, and it shattered everything I thought I knew about my family. They'd been lying about everything. The DNA test I ordered that same day just confirmed what I'd already started to suspect. Violet and I share exactly 0% genetic material. We're not sisters, not even distant cousins. We're complete strangers who happened to grow up in the same house. Which means for 4 years, I've been giving my blood to save a stranger's life, while my own family watched, knowing the truth, and said nothing. Now I'm sitting here with the evidence of their deception glowing on my phone screen, and I can't help but wonder, how many other lies have they told me? How deep does this betrayal go? And most importantly, who am I really, if not Violet's little sister? What happened next didn't just change how I saw my family, it destroyed every assumption I'd ever made about love, loyalty, and what it means to belong somewhere. And that was just the beginning. Growing up in the Smith household meant learning to be invisible. Our 2-story colonial house on Maple Ridge Drive looked picture-perfect from the outside. Manicured lawn, white picket fence, seasonal wreaths that Mom changed with religious precision. Inside, it was a carefully orchestrated performance where everyone knew their role. Violet was the star, 5 years older, effortlessly beautiful, and blessed with the kind of confidence that made adults lean in when she spoke. Even as a child, she had this way of commanding attention that seemed almost supernatural. Teachers loved her, neighbors praised her, and our parents treated her like she was destined for greatness. I was the supporting cast, the younger daughter who tried too hard, smiled too much, and never quite measured up to the impossible standard Violet had set. While she was student body president, I struggled to make friends. While she earned a full scholarship to Westfield University, I barely graduated high school with a 2.8 GPA. Mariel's always been more of a late bloomer, Mom would tell concerned relatives at family gatherings, her hand resting protectively on my shoulder. Not everyone can be exceptional like Violet. Exceptional. That word followed Violet everywhere, and its absence followed me. But it was behind closed doors where the real dynamic revealed itself. In public, Violet played the loving big sister perfectly. She'd ruffle my hair, include me in conversations with her friends just enough to seem caring, and always made sure to pose for photos with her arm around me. The camera loved us together. Her, tall and elegant, me, shorter and softer, both of us with the same dark brown hair and hazel eyes that people always said we inherited from Mom. In private, Violet was different, colder, more calculating. "You know you're adopted, right?" she told me when I was 12, her voice casual as she painted her nails a deep crimson. We were in her bedroom, all white furniture and fairy lights like something from a magazine. I remember my stomach dropping. What? I mean, look at you. Look at me. We don't even look related. She held up her hand to examine her nail work, not bothering to make eye contact. Mom and Dad probably just felt sorry for you. When I ran crying to our parents, they assured me Violet was just being mean, that of course I was their biological daughter. But the seed of doubt she'd planted that day grew quietly in the back of my mind for years. That was Violet's specialty, planting seeds of doubt, making me question everything about myself, all while maintaining plausible deniability. She never outright bullied me. She was too smart for that. Instead, she perfected the art of the subtle cut, the backhanded compliment, the casual cruelty that left no visible wounds. Mariel's so lucky she doesn't have to worry about maintaining her figure like I do. She'd say at family dinners, smiling sweetly while I pushed food around my plate, "Some people are just naturally built differently." Or, "I love how Mariel never lets other people's opinions affect her. She just wears whatever makes her comfortable, even if it's not exactly flattering." Our parents, Harold and Catherine, seemed oblivious to these moments. Dad was a quiet man who worked long hours at his accounting firm and preferred to avoid conflict. Mom was so busy managing the family's image, volunteering at school events, organizing neighborhood potlucks, maintaining our social standing in Millbrook Heights, that she rarely looked beneath the surface. When she did pay attention to the dynamic between Violet and me, she interpreted it through rose-colored glasses. "You girls are so lucky to have each other," she'd say, usually while forcing us to pose for yet another family photo. "Sisters are the most important relationship you'll ever have." Harold would nod along, adding his favorite piece of wisdom: "Family is everything. Blood is thicker than water." The irony of that phrase now makes me sick. Catherine Smith was the kind of mother who lived vicariously through her daughter's achievements, but only when those achievements reflected well on her. Violet's successes became her successes. My struggles became her disappointments. "Mrs. Henderson asked about your grades again today," she'd tell me after running into neighbors at the grocery store. I didn't know what to say. Violet never gave me this kind of embarrassment. She wasn't cruel exactly, just conditional. Her love felt like something I had to earn, something that could be withdrawn if I didn't perform well enough. With Violet, her love seemed automatic, unconditional, guaranteed. The house itself reflected this dynamic. Violet's room was a shrine, trophies, certificates, and photos documenting every achievement. My room was an afterthought, decorated with whatever furniture was left over and posters I'd bought with my own babysitting money. Even our childhood photos told the story. In every family portrait, Violet was positioned front and center, glowing with confidence. I was always slightly behind, slightly to the side, trying to mirror her smile, but never quite getting it right. During holidays, the performance reached its peak. Extended family would gather, and everyone would comment on how proud Harold and Catherine must be of their daughters. Plural, but really they meant Violet. I was just the other one, the one who made Violet look even better by comparison. "Violet's going places," Uncle Tom would say, clapping Dad on the back. "That girl's got something special. And Mariel's a good kid too," Aunt Janet would add, almost as an afterthought. A good kid. Not special, not destined for greatness, just good enough. But the strangest part was how normal it all felt at the time. This was just how our family worked. Violet was the sun, and the rest of us were planets orbiting around her light. It never occurred to me to question why she got to be the center of the universe, or why my role was always to make her shine brighter. I thought this was what love looked like in families. I thought the hollow feeling in my chest during family gatherings was normal. I thought everyone felt like a stranger in their own home sometimes. Looking back now with the DNA results burning in my mind, I can see the signs I missed. The way photographs were carefully curated to hide certain truths, the way conversations stopped when I entered rooms, the way medical appointments were scheduled around me rather than including me. But at 19, when Violet got sick, I still believed we were a family. I still believed that blood was thicker than water, even when that blood was literally flowing from my veins into hers every single week. I had no idea that everything I believed about love, loyalty, and belonging was about to be tested in ways I never could have imagined. The performance was about to end, and the truth was about to tear our perfect family portrait into pieces. The night everything changed started like any other summer evening in Millbrook Heights. It was July 15th, 2019, a date I'll never forget because it marked the beginning of 4 years of lies. I was 19, working double shifts at Brewster's Coffee House to save money for community college, and Violet had just landed her dream job at Morrison & Associates, a high-end marketing firm in Portland. We were having one of Mom's famous backyard barbecues, the kind where she invited half the neighborhood and spent 3 days preparing homemade potato salad and her signature cherry pie. String lights were draped between the oak trees, citronella candles flickered on every surface, and the air smelled like grilled corn and summer roses from her prized garden. Violet had driven down from Portland for the weekend, arriving in her new silver BMW, a graduation gift from our parents that I tried not to think about too much. She looked radiant that night, wearing a flowing white sundress that made her look like she'd stepped out of a lifestyle magazine. Everyone was fussing over her new job, her new apartment in the Pearl District, her bright future stretching endlessly ahead of her. I was manning the drink station, refilling plastic cups with lemonade and iced tea, when I noticed Violet sitting alone on the porch swing. It was unusual. She typically thrived as the center of attention at these gatherings, holding court with neighbors and family friends who hung on her every word about city life and corporate success. But tonight, she looked pale. More than pale, actually. She looked almost gray in the golden evening light. Her hand rested against her chest, and she was taking these shallow, careful breaths, like the air wasn't quite reaching her lungs. "You okay, Vi?" I called out, setting down the pitcher of lemonade. She looked up, and for just a moment, I saw something I'd never seen in Violet's eyes before. Fear. Real, genuine fear. But it disappeared so quickly, I almost convinced myself I'd imagined it. "I'm tired," she said, forcing one of her practiced smiles. You know how exhausting success can be. Even when she was obviously unwell, she couldn't resist a subtle dig at my lack of achievements. But something about her voice was different. Weaker, like she was having trouble projecting the confidence that usually came so naturally to her. I walked over to the porch, genuinely concerned despite our complicated relationship. "You look really pale. Maybe you should go inside where it's cooler." "I'm fine, Mariel." Her tone was sharp, but there was an edge of desperation underneath it. "Don't make a scene." That's when Mrs. Patterson from next door wandered over, her paper plate loaded with Dad's famous barbecue ribs. "Violet, honey, you look absolutely exhausted. Are you eating enough? You know how these young career women forget to take care of themselves." Violet's jaw tightened. She hated any suggestion that she wasn't perfectly in control of every aspect of her life. "I'm perfectly fine, Mrs. Patterson. Just working hard." But as she stood up to prove her point, something happened that I'll never forget. Her legs seemed to give out slightly, and she had to grip the porch railing to steady herself. The color drained from her face completely, and for a terrifying moment, I thought she might faint right there in front of everyone. "Violet!" I reached out to help her, but she waved me away. I said I'm fine, but her voice was barely above a whisper.
Mrs. Patterson set down her plate, her maternal instincts kicking in. "Sweetie, you need to sit down. Harold, Catherine, you need to see this." Within seconds, our parents were rushing over, along with half the party guests. Mom immediately went into crisis management mode, the same way she handled any situation that threatened our family's perfect image. "She's just overworked," Mom announced to the gathered crowd, her voice bright and reassuring. "You know how dedicated she is to her new position. Sometimes the most successful people push themselves too hard." Dad was more practical, helping Violet back to the swing and positioning himself to block the neighbor's view. "Maybe we should call Dr. Hendricks," he said quietly. "No doctors," Violet said firmly, some of her strength returning now that she was sitting down. "I just need some water and a good night's sleep." But I was watching her closely now, and what I saw didn't make sense. This wasn't just exhaustion or dehydration. There was something fundamentally wrong. Her breathing was too shallow, her skin had an almost translucent quality, and when she picked up her glass of lemonade, her hand was shaking so badly she could barely hold it steady. The party continued around us, but the mood had shifted. Guests kept glancing over at Violet with worried expressions, and Mom was working overtime to redirect conversations back to lighter topics. Dad hovered nearby, trying to look casual while clearly monitoring Violet's every movement. Later that evening, after the last guest had left and we were cleaning up the backyard, I overheard my parents talking in hushed voices by the kitchen window. "This isn't just stress, Harold. Did you see how she looked? I've never seen her so—" "So what?" Dad interrupted. "So fragile. Violet's never been fragile a day in her life." I froze, a stack of paper plates halfway to the garbage bag. Fragile wasn't a word anyone had ever used to describe Violet. She was many things: demanding, manipulative, competitive, but never fragile. "Maybe she's anemic," Dad suggested. "Young women sometimes don't eat enough iron-rich foods." "But anemia doesn't make someone nearly collapse like that. Something's wrong, really wrong." I continued cleaning, but my mind was racing. The fear I'd seen in Violet's eyes, the way her body had seemed to betray her, the careful way she'd been breathing, none of it added up to simple exhaustion or poor nutrition. When I went to bed that night, I couldn't stop thinking about the moment Violet's legs had given out. For someone who prided herself on being in complete control, the look of bewildered terror on her face had been completely out of character. But the next morning, it was like nothing had happened. Violet came down for breakfast looking refreshed and perfectly put together, wearing one of her designer blazers and acting like her usual confident self. "Much better after a good night's sleep," she announced, pouring herself coffee and checking her phone. "I told you it was just exhaustion." Dad and Mom exchanged a look, but didn't push the issue. In our family, if Violet said everything was fine, then everything was fine. That was just how things worked. "Maybe you should take a vacation," Mom suggested carefully. "You've been working so hard since graduation." Violet waved the suggestion away. "Vacation is for people who aren't building their careers. I'll be fine." But I wasn't convinced. Over the next few weeks, I found myself paying closer attention to Violet during her weekend visits home. She was more tired than usual, sometimes napping in the afternoon, something she'd never done before. She seemed to get winded walking up the stairs to her old bedroom. And once I caught her standing in front of the bathroom mirror, pulling down her lower eyelid and staring at something with a concerned expression. When I asked if she was feeling okay, she always had the same response. "I'm perfect, Mariel. Not everyone needs to dramatize every little thing." But perfect people don't nearly faint at family barbecues. Perfect people don't get out of breath walking up a single flight of stairs. And perfect people definitely don't stand in bathroom mirrors looking scared of what they might find. Something was happening to Violet. Something she was trying desperately to hide. And call it intuition or maybe just years of being her sister, but I had a terrible feeling that whatever was wrong was about to change all of our lives forever. I just had no idea how right I was or how much that change would cost me. 3 weeks after the barbecue incident, Mom called me at work with what she described as wonderful news. I was in the middle of the afternoon rush at Brewster's, steaming milk for a complicated caramel macchiato order, when my phone buzzed against my hip. "Mariel, honey, can you take a break? I need to talk to you about something important." The urgency in her voice made my stomach clench. In our family, important conversations were never actually important. For me, they were important for everyone else, and I was just expected to go along with whatever had been decided. "I'm working, Mom. Can this wait until I get home?" "Well, I suppose it could, but I'm just so excited to share this with you. We found a solution to Violet's health problems." I stepped away from the espresso machine, signaling to my coworker Jake that I needed a minute. "What kind of solution?" "Dr. Patterson. You remember Dr. Patterson from the hospital? He's Mrs. Patterson's nephew. Anyway, he's a hematologist, and he thinks he knows exactly what's wrong with Violet."
The relief in Mom's voice was palpable, but something about this conversation felt rehearsed, like she'd practiced what she was going to say before calling me. "That's great, Mom. What did he find?" "Well, it's a bit complicated, but the important thing is that it's completely treatable. Violet just needs regular blood transfusions to manage the condition." "Isn't that wonderful?" I frowned, wiping down the counter while I processed this information. "Blood transfusions? That sounds pretty serious." "Oh, it's not serious at all," Mom said quickly. "Thousands of people manage this condition with regular transfusions. The only challenge is finding compatible donors, but that's where the really exciting part comes in." Here it comes, I thought, the part where this conversation becomes about me. Dr. Patterson ran some preliminary tests, and it turns out you're a perfect match for Violet. Can you believe it? What are the odds that sisters would be so perfectly compatible? Wait, what kind of tests? When did I take any tests? There was a brief pause, and I could practically hear Mom's smile faltering. Well, remember when you had that physical for your community college enrollment? Dr. Hendricks sent your blood work over to Dr. Patterson, just as a precaution. Standard procedure when there's a potential genetic condition in the family. None of this made sense. My physical had been 6 months ago, long before Violet's health problems started. And since when did doctors share blood work without permission? Mom, I never agreed to have my blood work shared with anyone. Sweetie, you're overthinking this. The important thing is that you can help your sister get better. Dr. Patterson says that with regular donations from a compatible family member, Violet could live a completely normal life. Regular donations? What does that mean? Just once a week, maybe twice during flare-ups, but usually just once. It's really not that different from regular blood donation, except instead of helping strangers, you'd be helping family. Once a week. I did quick math in my head. That would be 52 times a year. For how long? The rest of Violet's life? I need to talk to Dr. Patterson myself. This is a big decision. Of course! That's exactly what we hoped you'd say. In fact, he's expecting us tomorrow morning at 9. I've already cleared it with your manager. You can miss the morning shift. My manager, Derek, chose that moment to walk by and give me a pointed look. We were swamped, and I'd been on the phone for too long already. You called Derek without asking me first? I knew you'd want to do this, sweetheart. You've always been so generous, so willing to help others. This is just who you are. That phrase, "this is just who you are," would haunt me for years. As if my entire identity was built around being useful to other people, particularly Violet. I hung up feeling manipulated, but couldn't quite put my finger on why. Everything Mom had said sounded reasonable, even admirable. Help your sister, save her life, be the hero of the family for once. That evening, I tried to research Violet's condition online, but Mom had been vague about the specific diagnosis. Hereditary spherocytosis, she'd said when I pressed her for details. But when I looked it up, the treatment protocols didn't match what she'd described. Most patients managed the condition with medication and only needed transfusions during severe episodes, not weekly donations for life. When I brought this up at dinner, Dad stepped in with his calm, authoritative voice. Dr. Patterson explained that Violet has a particularly severe variant. Every case is different, Mariel. That's why we trust the experts. Violet, who had driven down from Portland for this family meeting, sat quietly through most of the conversation. She looked better than she had at the barbecue, color in her cheeks, steady breathing, but there was something strange about her demeanor. She seemed almost detached, like she was watching a play rather than participating in a conversation about her own health. How do you feel about all this, Vi? I asked directly. She looked up from her plate, and for a moment I saw that same flash of fear I'd noticed weeks earlier, but it was gone so quickly I might have imagined it. I feel grateful, she said carefully. Grateful to have a sister who would do this for me. But are you scared about the transfusions, about managing this condition? Scared, Violet's voice took on its familiar sharp edge. I don't have the luxury of being scared. I have to be practical. This is my reality now. There was something final about the way she said it, like the conversation was over and my participation was just a formality. After dinner, I cornered Mom in the kitchen while she loaded the dishwasher. This feels rushed. Shouldn't I get a second opinion? Talk to my own doctor? Mom's hands stilled on a dinner plate. Mariel, your sister is sick. Every day we wait is another day her condition could worsen. Dr. Patterson says time is of the essence. But what if what? Her voice was sharper now, the forced cheerfulness beginning to crack. What if you decide your convenience is more important than Violet's life? The words hit like a slap. That's not what I'm saying! Isn't it? Because from where I'm standing, it sounds like you're looking for excuses not to help your own sister. I felt tears prick my eyes.
This was exactly what always happened in our family. Any question, any hesitation, any attempt to advocate for myself was immediately reframed as selfishness. I just want to understand what I'm agreeing to.
Mom's expression softened, and she pulled me into a hug that smelled like her familiar lavender perfume. Oh, sweetheart, I know this is overwhelming, but think about how proud you'll be knowing that you literally saved Violet's life. Think about the bond you'll share. That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, trying to sort through my feelings. On one hand, if Violet really was sick, if I really could help her, didn't I have an obligation to try? What kind of sister would I be if I refused? On the other hand, something about this whole situation felt orchestrated, like a play where everyone knew their lines except me. I thought about the timing, how quickly they'd found this doctor, how conveniently my blood work had already been tested, how my work schedule had been cleared without my input. I thought about Violet's strange detachment, Mom's rehearsed enthusiasm, Dad's uncharacteristic involvement in family medical decisions. But mostly, I thought about that moment at the barbecue when Violet had looked genuinely scared. Whatever else was happening, whatever details didn't quite add up, that fear had been real. And if Violet was scared, maybe she really did need help. Maybe I was overthinking things. Maybe this was just what families did for each other. The appointment with Dr. Patterson was scheduled at 9 a.m. sharp. By the time I finally fell asleep, I'd convinced myself that my doubts were just anxiety, that helping Violet was the right thing to do, that this was my chance to finally be the daughter who mattered. I had no idea I was walking into a trap that had been months in the making. The appointment with Dr. Patterson changed everything, though not in the way I had expected. Mom picked me up at 8:30 a.m. in her pristine Honda Accord, the same car she'd driven to every school event, every parent-teacher conference, every moment that required her to present as the perfect suburban mother. "You look nervous, sweet mama," she said as we pulled out of my apartment complex parking lot. "There's nothing to be nervous about. This is just a consultation." But the manila folder sitting on her dashboard suggested otherwise. I could see papers sticking out, medical forms, insurance documents, what looked like consent paperwork already partially filled out. When I asked about it, she waved dismissively. "Just standard medical forms, nothing for you to worry about." Riverside Medical Center was a sprawling complex of glass and steel buildings connected by covered walkways. Dr. Patterson's office was in the newest wing, all modern furniture and motivational posters about blood health and donation. The waiting room smelled like industrial disinfectant and artificial lavender. Dr. Patterson himself was younger than I had expected, maybe 40 with prematurely gray hair and the kind of confident demeanor that made you want to trust him immediately. He greeted Mom like they were old friends, which struck me as odd for someone she'd supposedly just met through his aunt. "Thank you so much for fitting us in, Dr. Patterson. I know how busy you are." He led us into his office where Violet was already waiting. She looked professional and composed in a navy blue dress, her hands folded neatly in her lap. But I noticed she wouldn't quite meet my eyes when I said hello. I've been explaining to Violet how fortunate she has to have such a compatible sister. The genetic markers for this type of match are really quite remarkable. "What exactly makes us so compatible?" I asked. I tried researching hereditary spherocytosis, but the treatment protocols I found were different from what you're recommending. Dr. Patterson and Mom exchanged a quick glance. "Well, as I mentioned to your mother, Violet has a particularly aggressive variant. The standard treatments aren't effective in her case." He pulled out a thick medical file, presumably Violet's, and flipped through several pages. "Her red blood cells are breaking down faster than her body can replace them. Without regular transfusions from a compatible donor, her condition will continue to deteriorate." "How regular?" I pressed. "Initially, we'll need weekly donations. Once we establish a stable pattern, we might be able to reduce that to every 10 days, possibly every 2 weeks if she responds well." Violet spoke for the first time since I had arrived. "I know it's a lot to ask, Mariel. If there was any other option—" Her voice carried just the right note of reluctant vulnerability, but something about her tone felt rehearsed, like she'd practiced this conversation. "Of course there are other options," I said, Blood banks, volunteer donors, medical alternatives. People don't usually rely on one family member for long-term transfusion needs. Dr. Patterson leaned forward, his expression growing serious. I wish that were true in Violet's case. You see, she's developed what we call selective compatibility syndrome. Her body has begun rejecting transfusions from unrelated donors even when the blood types match perfectly. I'd never heard of selective compatibility syndrome, and judging by my online research, it wasn't a commonly recognized condition. But Dr. Patterson spoke with such authority, such clinical precision, that I found myself doubting my own research. The immune system is incredibly complex. Sometimes, particularly in cases of genetic blood disorders, patients develop very specific requirements for donor compatibility. Family members, especially siblings, have the best chance of providing sustainable, long-term transfusion support. Mom nodded along like she understood every word, though I doubted she'd researched blood disorders any more than I had. What happens if I can't commit to this schedule? What if I get sick or need to travel or—
The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. Mariel, Mom's voice carried a warning tone. We're talking about your sister's life. I know that. I'm just trying to understand the practical implications. Dr. Patterson cleared his throat diplomatically. It's natural to have concerns. This is a significant commitment. But I want to stress how critical consistent transfusions will be for Violet's survival. Missing even one scheduled donation could trigger a hemolytic crisis. Basically, her remaining red blood cells could break down catastrophically. How long would this go on? I asked. Months? Years? Another glance passed between Dr. Patterson and Mom. It's difficult to say. Some patients see improvement over time. Others require lifelong management. Lifelong. The words sat in the room like a lead weight. I think I need some time to consider this, I said finally. Violet's composure cracked slightly. Time? Mariel, I don't have time. Every day we wait, I get weaker. Sweetheart, Mom reached over and squeezed my hand. Dr. Patterson has graciously agreed to begin the process immediately if you're willing. Today, even. We could start with your first donation this afternoon. Today? But I haven't agreed to anything yet. The consent forms are already prepared, Dr. Patterson said smoothly, sliding a clipboard across his desk. Standard donor agreements, medical release forms, everything you'd need to get started. I stared at the clipboard. Pages of dense medical and legal text, signature lines highlighted in yellow, witness signatures already filled in. Mom and Violet had signed as witnesses before I'd even seen the documents. This feels rushed. Rushed? Mom's voice was getting higher, a sign that her patience was wearing thin. Violet has been suffering for weeks while we arranged this consultation. How is helping your sick sister rushed? I know that. I'm just trying to understand the practical implications. Then what is it? Violet interrupted, and for the first time, I heard genuine emotion in her voice. Anger. Because from where I'm sitting, it sounds like you're looking for reasons to say no. I just want to make an informed decision. How much more information do you need? Mom stood up, her purse clutched tightly in her hands. Your sister is dying, Mariel. Dying. And you're worried about inconvenience? The word dying hit me like a physical blow. In all our conversations about Violet's condition, no one had used that word before. Dr. Patterson, I turned to him desperately. Is she really dying? His expression was grave. Yes, without proper treatment, the condition is progressive and ultimately fatal. The room was silent except for the hum of fluorescent lights overhead. I felt the weight of 3 pairs of eyes on me waiting for my decision, waiting for me to do what they had obviously already decided I would do. If I agree to this, I said slowly, I want to understand exactly what I'm committing to. Weekly donations for how long? What are the risks to my own health? What happens if I need to stop for any reason? We can discuss all those details once we get started. The important thing right now is beginning treatment before Violet's condition worsens. But I want to discuss them now. Mom sat back down heavily, her composure finally cracking. Mariel, honey, you're overcomplicating this. Sometimes in life, we have to make decisions based on love, not on having every single detail planned out in advance. This isn't about love, I said, surprising myself with my firmness. This is about making a medical decision that will affect my life for potentially years. Violet stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. Fine, I get it. I understand exactly where I stand with you. Her voice was shaking, but whether from illness or anger, I couldn't tell. I'll figure something else out. Wait! No, it's fine. I'll just manage somehow. Don't worry about me. She headed for the door, and Mom jumped up to follow her. Violet, don't do this. Mariel doesn't mean to be selfish. Selfish. There was that word again. Dr. Patterson remained seated, watching the drama unfold with what seemed like practiced patience. This is actually quite common, he said to me quietly, while Mom tried to coax Violet back into the room. Family dynamics can complicate medical decisions, but ultimately, most people find that helping a loved one is its own reward. I stared at the consent forms, my signature lines still blank. Through the office door, I could hear Violet crying in the hallway. Real, heartbroken sobs that made my chest ache. If I agree to this, I want to understand exactly what I'm committing to. Weekly donations for how long? What are the risks to my own health? What happens if I need to stop for any reason? We can discuss all those details once we get started. The important thing right now is beginning treatment before Violet's condition worsens. But I want to discuss them now. Mom sat back down heavily, her composure finally cracking. Mariel, honey, you're overcomplicating this. Sometimes in life, we have to make decisions based on love, not on having every single detail planned out in advance. This isn't about love, I said, surprising myself with my firmness. This is about making a medical decision that will affect my life for potentially years. Violet stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. Fine, I get it. I understand exactly where I stand with you. Her voice was shaking, but whether from illness or anger, I couldn't tell. I'll figure something else out. Wait! No, it's fine. I'll just manage somehow. Don't worry about me. She headed for the door, and Mom jumped up to follow her. Violet, don't do this. Mariel doesn't mean to be selfish. Selfish. There was that word again. Dr. Patterson remained seated, watching the drama unfold with what seemed like practiced patience. This is actually quite common, he said to me quietly, while Mom tried to coax Violet back into the room. Family dynamics can complicate medical decisions, but ultimately, most people find that helping a loved one is its own reward. I stared at the consent forms, my signature line still blank. Through the office door, I could hear Violet crying in the hallway, real, heartbroken sobs that made my chest ache. If I agree to this, if I commit to this, there's no going back, is there? Dr. Patterson smiled sympathetically. Mariel, you're not signing your life away. You're saving your sister's life. There's a difference. But as I picked up the pen, my hand shaking slightly, I couldn't help but feeling like those two things might be exactly the same. I signed the papers that day, not because I was convinced it was the right decision, but because watching Violet sob in that sterile hallway made me feel like the worst sister in the world. The pen felt impossibly heavy in my hand as I scrawled my name across line after line of medical consent forms, donor agreements, and liability waivers that I barely had time to read. You're doing a beautiful thing, Dr. Patterson said as he witnessed my signature on the final document. Violet is lucky to have you.
But when I looked at Violet, she didn't look lucky. She looked relieved in a way that seemed almost calculated, like she'd been holding her breath, waiting for me to cave, and now she could finally exhale. The first blood donation happened that same afternoon. They had a procedure room ready, complete with a comfortable reclining chair, warm blankets, and a selection of magazines that felt too perfectly curated, like someone had spent time thinking about what would make me comfortable during what they clearly expected to become a routine appointment.
This is a bit more blood than standard donations, the nurse Linda explained as she prepared the collection bag. But Dr. Patterson says Violet needs the extra volume to maintain her levels. I watched my blood flow through the clear tubing, darker and thicker than I'd expected. How much more? About double a standard donation, but you're young and healthy. Your body will replenish it quickly. Double. That seemed like a lot, but Linda spoke with such casual confidence that I didn't feel qualified to question her medical judgment. Mom sat beside me the entire time, stroking my hand and talking about how proud she was, how this was what real love looked like, how I was finally showing the kind of maturity and selflessness that she had always hoped I would develop. "Your grandmother would be so proud," she said, referencing my father's mother, who had died when I was 15. "She always said that family was everything, that we'd take care of our own no matter what." Violet stayed in the waiting room during my donation, claiming she felt too weak to watch. When I was finished and the nurse was bandaging my arm, Violet appeared in the doorway looking significantly better than she had that morning. Her color was brighter, her posture straighter, her breathing deeper and more relaxed. "Thank you," she said, simply, and for a moment she almost looked like the sister I'd grown up with. Vulnerable, grateful, human. "How do you feel?" I asked. "Like I can breathe again." The transformation was remarkable. Within hours of receiving my blood, Violet seemed to have more energy than she'd had in months. She insisted on taking us all to dinner at Marcello's, an expensive Italian restaurant in downtown Portland that I'd never been able to afford on my coffee shop salary. "This is a celebration," she announced over appetizers, "a celebration of family, of love, of second chances." She ordered wine for the table, expensive wine, the kind that came with a detailed explanation from the sommelier. Dad raised his glass in a toast. "To Mariel," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "for showing us what it means to be a hero." Hero. I'd never been called that before in my family. It felt simultaneously wonderful and deeply wrong, like wearing clothes that didn't quite fit. Over the next few weeks, we settled into what Mom called our new normal. Every Tuesday at 8 a.m., I would drive to Riverside Medical Center for my donation appointment. Linda would draw my blood while I read magazines or scrolled through my phone, trying not to think about how tired I felt afterward or how long it took for the dizziness to completely fade. The routine became so automatic that I stopped questioning it. Tuesday mornings belonged to Violet now, just like everything else in our family eventually did. But it was the small changes that should have bothered me more. My manager at Brewster's started scheduling me for later shifts to accommodate my medical appointments, even though I'd never asked for that adjustment. When I mentioned wanting to take a weekend trip with some college friends, Mom immediately reminded me that missing even one donation could be dangerous for Violet's health. "What if something happened to her while you were gone?" she asked, her voice heavy with hypothetical guilt. "Could you live with yourself?" So I stayed home. I always stayed home. My social life contracted around the Tuesday schedule. Friends stopped inviting me to things because I always had to check first. Check if Violet needed extra donations that week. Check if there were any changes to the medical routine. Check if my leaving town would somehow threaten my sister's survival. "You've become so responsible," Mom would say approvingly, "so reliable. This experience has really matured you." But mature felt a lot like trapped. 3 months into our routine, something strange happened. I was early for my appointment and decided to grab coffee from the hospital cafeteria instead of waiting in Dr. Patterson's office. As I walked past the hematology ward, I saw Violet through a window talking to a man I didn't recognize. She was animated, gesturing with her hands, laughing at something he'd said. She looked healthier than I'd seen her in years, almost glowing.
When she spotted me through the glass, her expression changed instantly. The laughter died, her shoulders dropped slightly, and she quickly ended her conversation. By the time I reached the ward entrance, she was alone, sitting in a wheelchair and looking pale and exhausted. "Mariel, what are you doing here so early?" "Just grabbed coffee. How are you feeling today?" "Terrible." But something about her voice didn't match her words. "Really weak. I hope your donation today helps." But I'd just seen her looking anything but weak. I'd seen her looking like someone who wasn't sick at all. During my donation that day, I asked Linda about Violet's treatment plan. How long do patients typically need these transfusions? "Well, every case is different," Linda said, adjusting the blood pressure cuff on my arm. "But most of Dr. Patterson's long-term patients have been with us for years." "Years?"
Oh, yes. Some of them have been coming here for 5, 6, 7 years. It becomes like family, really. We get to know everyone so well. 7 years. The number hit me like a physical weight. 7 years of Tuesday mornings. 7 years of double donations. 7 years of my life organized around Violet's medical needs. Do they ever get better? Do they ever not need the transfusions anymore? Linda paused in her work, and when I looked at her, she seemed to be choosing her words carefully. Dr. Patterson would be the better person to ask about specific prognosis questions, but something in her tone suggested that recovery wasn't really part of the plan. That evening, I tried to research long-term transfusion therapy for hereditary spherocytosis. What I found didn't match our situation at all. Most patients with the condition lived normal lives with minimal treatment. Long-term transfusion dependence was rare and usually indicated other underlying conditions. When I brought this up with Mom, she seemed irritated by my questions. "Mariel, we've been through this. Violet has an unusual case. Why are you researching medical conditions on the internet instead of trusting the doctors?" "Because I want to understand what I've committed to." "You've committed to saving your sister's life. That should be enough understanding for anyone." But it wasn't enough. Not anymore. The next Tuesday, I arrived at the medical center early again, hoping to catch another glimpse of Violet when she thought no one was watching. What I saw made my blood run cold. Violet was in the parking lot, talking on her phone. But she wasn't leaning against a car for support or sitting down to conserve energy. She was pacing back and forth with the kind of restless energy that didn't belong to someone with a chronic blood disorder. "Just need to keep this up for another year or two," I heard her say as I approached from behind a parked van. "Then we can figure out the next phase." Next phase. Keep this up. The words didn't sound like someone talking about managing a medical condition. They sounded like someone talking about maintaining a lie. When she saw me, her phone disappeared into her purse so quickly I almost missed it. "Mariel, you're early again." "Yeah, Who are you talking to?" "Insurance company. You know how complicated medical billing can be." But insurance companies didn't usually require pacing phone calls about next phases and keeping things up for another year or two. As we walked into the medical center together, Violet's hand on my arm for support, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was walking into something much bigger and more complicated than a simple medical treatment. And for the first time since this all began, I started to wonder if my sister was really sick at all. The morning everything unraveled started like any other Tuesday, except I woke up feeling worse than I had in months. My alarm went off at 6:30 a.m., but I'd been awake since 4, staring at the ceiling and fighting waves of nausea that seemed to roll through me every few minutes. 6 months of double blood donations were taking their toll. I'd lost weight I couldn't afford to lose, my skin had taken on a grayish pallor that makeup couldn't quite cover, and I was constantly exhausted in a way that sleep never seemed to fix. When I mentioned this to Linda during my previous donation, she'd brushed it off as seasonal fatigue.
Winter in Oregon will do that to anyone, she'd said, cheerfully. Maybe try some vitamin D supplements. But this felt like more than seasonal depression. This felt like my body was running on empty. I dragged myself out of bed and into the shower, letting the hot water run over me longer than usual. In the mirror afterward, I barely recognized myself. The person staring back looked hollowed out, like someone had slowly drained all the vitality from her face. My eyes, once bright hazel, seemed dulled and sunken. Even my hair looked thinner. The drive to Riverside Medical Center felt endless. I had to pull over twice because dizzy spells made it dangerous to keep driving. By the time I reached the parking lot, I was 20 minutes late, something that had never happened before in our 6 months of routine appointments. Mom was waiting in the lobby, checking her watch with obvious agitation. "Mariel, where have you been? Dr. Patterson moved Violet's transfusion an hour early because she's having a particularly difficult morning." "I'm sorry, I wasn't feeling well." "You weren't feeling well?" Mom's voice rose slightly, drawing looks from other people in the waiting area. "Your sister is upstairs right now, weak as a kitten, waiting for the blood she needs to survive, and you're worried about not feeling well?" The unfairness of it hit me like a slap. 6 months of punctual donations, 6 months of organizing my entire life around Violet's medical needs, and the one time I was late, because I was actually sick myself, I was made to feel guilty about it. "I'm here now," I said quietly. "Yes, well, let's just hope we're not too late." We took the elevator to the 3rd floor in silence. I leaned against the wall, trying to fight another wave of dizziness, while Mom tapped her foot impatiently. When the doors opened, we walked quickly down the familiar hallway towards Dr. Patterson's office. But as we passed the hematology ward, I saw something that stopped me cold.
Violet was standing at the nurse's station, signing paperwork. Not sitting in a wheelchair. Not leaning on anyone for support, but standing upright with perfect posture. She was wearing designer jeans and a cashmere sweater that probably cost more than I made in a month at Brewster's. Her hair was styled in loose waves, her makeup was flawless, and she had the kind of healthy glow that definitely didn't belong to someone having a particularly difficult morning. More importantly, she was laughing. Really laughing at something one of the nurses had said. Her laugh was bright and genuine and full of energy. "Mom," I said, grabbing her arm, "look!" But when Mom followed my gaze, Violet was already moving away from the nurse's station, suddenly walking more slowly, her shoulders dropping into the posture of someone who is weak and struggling. "What am I supposed to be looking at?" Mom asked. "Violet! She was just—" But how could I explain what I'd seen without sounding paranoid? "She looked really healthy just now." "Mariel, you're being ridiculous. People with chronic illnesses have good moments and bad moments. Just because she's not collapsed on the floor doesn't mean she's not suffering." By the time we reached Dr. Patterson's office, Violet had transformed completely. She was sitting in a chair with her head tilted back, eyes closed, breathing in the shallow, careful way that had become familiar over the past months. When she heard our footsteps, she opened her eyes slowly, as if even that small movement required enormous effort. "Mariel," she said weakly, "I was starting to worry something had happened to you." "I'm sorry I'm late. I wasn't feeling well this morning." Something flickered across Violet's face, so quickly I almost missed it. For just a moment, she looked annoyed. Not concerned, not sympathetic, but genuinely irritated that I had delayed her schedule. "Well, I'm just grateful you're here now," she said, the moment of irritation replaced by practiced gratitude. Dr. Patterson bustled in, carrying his usual clipboard and wearing his usual expression of professional concern. "Good morning, ladies. I understand we're running a bit behind schedule today." "Mariel wasn't feeling well," Mom explained, as if my health was somehow an inconvenience to be managed rather than a legitimate concern. "Nothing serious, I hope?" Dr. Patterson asked, but he was already preparing the donation equipment, clearly eager to get started. "Just tired and dizzy and nauseous." For the first time, Dr. Patterson actually looked at me,
really looked at me. His expression shifted slightly, and I saw what might have been concern cross his face. How long have you been experiencing these symptoms? A few weeks, maybe a month? He set down his clipboard and approached me, pulling a small flashlight from his pocket. May I? He checked my eyes, looked at my fingernails, pressed gently on the lymph nodes in my neck. His examination was more thorough than anything he had done in the previous 6 months. Mrs. Smith, he said finally, turning to Mom, I think we need to run some blood work on Mariel before we proceed with today's donation. Blood work? Mom sounded alarmed. Is that really necessary? Violet is waiting. Violet can wait another hour, Dr. Patterson said firmly. Mariel is showing signs of severe anemia. If I'm right, continuing with regular donations could be dangerous for her health. Anemia. The word hung in the air like an accusation. How dangerous? I asked. Potentially very dangerous. Your body may not be replenishing red blood cells fast enough to keep up with the donation schedule. I looked at Mom, expecting to see concern, maybe guilt, some acknowledgement that my health mattered too. Instead, I saw calculation. How long would blood work take? A few hours for results. And if the results show anemia, then we'd need to suspend donations until Mariel's levels improve, possibly permanently, depending on the severity. Mom glanced at Violet, who had gone very still in her chair. And what would that mean for Violet's treatment? We'd need to explore alternative options. What alternative? Violet spoke for the first time since Dr. Patterson had arrived, and her voice carried an edge of something that sounded like panic. Blood bank donors, synthetic alternatives, possibly other family members if they're compatible. But we've established that I'm the only compatible donor, I repeated what they'd told me months ago. Dr. Patterson frowned. Actually, that's unusual. Selective compatibility syndrome is quite rare. We might want to retest other potential donors in the family. The room went very quiet. Mom and Violet exchanged a look that lasted just a moment too long. That won't be necessary, Mom said quickly. I'm sure Mariel's blood work will be fine. She's probably just not eating well enough or getting enough sleep. Nevertheless, I insist we run the tests. Patient safety has to come first. As the nurse drew my blood for testing, ironic considering how much blood I'd already given, I found myself thinking about that look between Mom and Violet, about Violet's panic when alternative donors were mentioned, about the phone conversation I'd overheard about keeping this up for another year or two. Most of all, I thought about the woman I'd seen at the nurse's station 20 minutes ago, healthy, laughing, energetic, and how quickly she had transformed into the weak, suffering patient now sitting across from me. For the first time in 6 months, I allowed myself to consider a possibility that had been lurking at the edges of my consciousness. What if Violet wasn't sick at all? What if everything, the diagnosis, the treatments, the weekly donations, the complete reorganization of my life was an elaborate lie? And if it was a lie, what did that make me? A victim? An accomplice? A fool?
As I sat in that sterile medical office, waiting for blood test results that might change everything, I realized I was about to find out which one I really was. The answers, when they came, would be worse than anything I'd imagined. The blood test results came back 3 hours later, and they confirmed what Dr. Patterson had suspected. I had severe iron deficiency anemia. My red blood cell count was dangerously low, my hemoglobin levels were barely half of what they should be for someone my age, and my iron stores were completely depleted. I'm surprised you've been functioning at all, Dr. Patterson said, reviewing the lab report with a frown that seemed to deepen with each number he read. These levels indicate chronic, severe blood loss over an extended period. Chronic blood loss? I repeated, the words feeling strange in my mouth. You mean from the donations?
Exactly. Your body simply cannot keep up with the volume and frequency of blood we've been taking. This is my fault. I should have been monitoring your levels more closely. Mom shifted uncomfortably in her chair. So, what does this mean for Violet's treatment? It means Mariel cannot donate again until her levels return to normal, and even then, we'll need to reassess the entire protocol. How long will that take? Violet asked, and I noticed her hands were clenched tightly in her lap. 3 to 6 months, minimum. With iron supplements and dietary changes, possibly longer. The silence that followed was deafening. I watched my family absorb this information, and what I saw in their faces wasn't relief that my health would improve or guilt that I'd been endangered. It was frustration, panic even. There must be something we can do, Mom said, some way to accelerate Mario's recovery. Mrs. Smith, your daughter is severely anemic. Pushing her to donate in this condition could result in cardiac complications, organ failure, or worse. But what about Violet? Dr. Patterson looked genuinely confused by the question. We'll explore the alternatives I mentioned. Blood bank donors, other family members, synthetic options. I told you other family members aren't compatible, Violet said quickly, and I don't respond well to blood bank donations. We should still test other potential donors, Dr. Patterson insisted. Sometimes initial compatibility screenings miss suitable matches. That's not necessary, Mom interjected. Mariel will recover quickly. She's young and healthy. She's young, but she's not healthy, Dr. Patterson said firmly. And I cannot, in good medical conscience, allow her to continue donating until she is. As we left the medical center that afternoon, the tension between my family members was palpable. No one spoke during the elevator ride down to the parking garage. Mom's jaw was set in that particular way that meant she was furious, but trying to control it. Violet stared at the floor, her after-hours performance of weakness seeming more half-hearted now. This is a setback, but it's temporary, Mom said as we reached her car. Maybe it's not a setback, I said, surprising myself with my boldness. Maybe it's a sign that we need to find better long-term solutions for Violet. Both Mom and Violet turned to look at me with identical expressions of barely concealed annoyance. Mariel, I know you're disappointed about your test results, but we can't let temporary health issues derail your sister's treatment. Temporary health issues. That's what she called severe anemia that could have killed me. I think I need some time to recover and to think about what I want to do moving forward. What you want to do? Violet's voice was sharp. This isn't about what you want, Mariel. This is about keeping me alive. Something in her tone triggered a memory. That phone conversation I'd overheard in the parking lot. Just need to keep this up for another year or two. Keep what up, exactly? I'll drive myself home, I said, pulling out my car keys. Mariel, don't be dramatic, Mom called after me, but I was already walking away. That evening, alone in my apartment, I did what I should have done months ago. Real research. Not the cursory Google searches I'd done before, but deep, thorough investigation into hereditary spherocytosis, blood transfusion protocols, and donor compatibility requirements. What I found made my stomach turn. First, patients with hereditary spherocytosis rarely required regular transfusions. The condition was usually managed with folic acid supplements and, in severe cases, spleen removal. Long-term transfusion dependence was almost unheard of except in the extreme cases, and those patients typically showed obvious signs of severe illness that Violet had never displayed. Second, selective compatibility syndrome, the condition that supposedly made me Violet's only suitable donor, didn't exist, at least not under that name and not with the symptoms Dr. Patterson had described. I searched medical journals, databases, and patient support forums. Nothing. Third, the amount of blood I'd been donating was not standard for any legitimate medical protocol. Double donations every week for months on end would be considered dangerous and unnecessary, even for patients with genuine blood disorders. The evidence was overwhelming. Everything I'd been told about Violet's condition was either exaggerated or completely fabricated. But why? What possible reason could my family have for putting me through 6 months of unnecessary blood donations? I called in sick to work the next day and spent the morning driving around Millbrook Heights, trying to process what I had discovered. Almost without conscious decision, I found myself pulling into the Pallingamart of Riverside Medical Center. I wasn't scheduled for an appointment, but I needed to see Dr. Patterson again. I needed to ask him directly about the inconsistencies I had found. The receptionist told me Dr. Patterson was with a patient, but I could wait. I sat in the familiar waiting room, surrounded by the same health posters and motivational quotes I'd stared at for months, and tried to formulate the questions I wanted to ask.
That's when I overheard a conversation at the reception desk that changed everything. "Mrs. Chen is here for her consultation about the experimental treatment," the receptionist was saying to someone on the phone. "Which experimental treatment?" the voice on the other end asked. "The one Dr. Patterson is running. Something about family donor compatibility studies. She's bringing her daughter as a potential donor." Family donor compatibility studies. Experimental treatment. My blood ran cold. I waited until Mrs. Chen, a middle-aged woman with a teenage daughter, was called back for their appointment. Then I approached the receptionist. "Excuse me," I said, trying to keep my voice casual. "I'm a current patient of Dr. Patterson's, and I was wondering about the experimental treatment program. My family wasn't told it was experimental." The receptionist looked confused. "Oh, you must be part of the compatibility study. Yes, Dr. Patterson has been running trials for about 2 years now, testing long-term donor relationships between family members. It's fascinating work." Trials, studies, experimental work. "Are the patients actually sick?" I asked. "Well, that's the interesting part of the research. Some have genuine medical conditions. Others are part of the control group, healthy individuals whose families believe they're sick. Dr. Patterson is studying the psychological and physiological effects of perceived medical emergencies on donor behavior." The waiting room seemed to spin around me. Control group, healthy individuals whose families believe they're sick, perceived medical emergencies. I mumbled something about needing to reschedule and practically ran to the parking lot. Once I was safely in my car, I called the number I'd memorized months ago but never used, the patient advocacy hotline for the medical center. "I need to report a potential ethics violation," I told the woman who answered. "I think I've been unknowingly participating in medical research without proper consent." The conversation that followed lasted nearly an hour. I explained everything: the diagnosis that didn't match medical literature, the excessive donation schedule, the selective compatibility syndrome that didn't seem to exist, the experimental program I'd just learned about. "Ma'am, what you're describing sounds like research misconduct at minimum, possibly fraud. Are you willing to file a formal complaint?" "Yes," I said without hesitation, "but I need to understand something first. If Violet isn't really sick, if this is all some kind of research study, what happens to my blood? Where does it go?" There was a pause. "That's an excellent question, and one that our investigation will definitely need to answer." As I drove home, my mind raced with possibilities, each more disturbing than the last. If Violet wasn't sick, if Dr. Patterson was conducting unauthorized research, if my family had knowingly participated in this deception, then what had they been doing with 6 months' worth of my blood? The answer, I was beginning to suspect, had nothing to do with saving anyone's life, and everything to do with something much more sinister. That night, I made 2 decisions that would change the course of my life. I was going to find out exactly what had been done with my blood, and I was going to make sure that whoever was responsible would face the consequences. The truth was finally within reach, and it was going to destroy everything I thought I knew about my family. The DNA test kit arrived on a Thursday afternoon, 2 weeks after I'd filed the complaint with patient advocacy.
I'd ordered it on impulse after spending another sleepless night wondering how deep the lies about my family really went. If they could fabricate an entire medical condition, what else had they lied about? I'd been taking iron supplements religiously, and my energy was slowly returning. Colors seemed brighter, food actually tasted good again, and I could climb the stairs to my apartment without getting winded. The physical recovery made the emotional damage even more stark. I could feel in my own body just how much the donations had been harming me. The simple white box sat on my kitchen counter for 3 days before I worked up the courage to open it. Part of me was terrified of what I might find. The other part, the part that had been growing stronger since I'd filed that complaint, needed to know the truth, no matter how much it hurt. I followed the instructions carefully, spitting into the tube until I reached the fill line, sealing it with the provided solution, and packaging it for shipping. As I dropped it in the mailbox outside my apartment building, I felt like I was mailing away the last vestiges of the life I'd known. The waiting period was torture. 3 weeks of wondering, researching, and trying to act normal around my family. Mom called daily to check on my recovery and drop hints about when I might be ready to resume donations. Violet texted occasionally, brief messages asking how I was feeling that felt more like progress reports than genuine concern. During this time, the patient advocacy investigation was moving forward. I'd had 2 more interviews with investigators, providing them with all my medical records, donation schedules, and documentation I could gather. They'd informed me that Dr. Patterson's research protocols were under review and that several other families had come forward with similar concerns. Your case appears to be part of a larger pattern, Rebecca Martinez, the lead investigator, had told me during our second meeting. We're looking at potential violations of research ethics, informed consent protocols, and possibly more. What kind of more serious charges?
We're not ready to say yet. But Mariel, I want you to know that you've been incredibly brave coming forward. This investigation could help a lot of people. The BNA results arrived on a Tuesday. Ironically, what used to be my donation day. I was home alone, having called in sick to Brewster's because I couldn't concentrate on work. The envelope felt impossibly light for something that might contain such heavy truths. I opened it slowly, hands shaking as I logged into the website and entered my access code. The main results page loaded with colorful charts and percentages that meant nothing to me at first glance. But then I clicked on the relatives section, and my world collapsed. Violet Whitaker, half-sister. Shared DNA, 23.4%. Paternal relationship, 0%. Half-sister, not full sister, and 0 paternal DNA match, which meant we shared a mother but had different fathers. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely click through to see more details. There were other relatives listed, people I'd never heard of with the last name Rodriguez, aunts, uncles, cousins from my biological father's side that I never knew existed. But it was the next discovery that made me actually gasp out loud. Harold Smith was listed as no genetic relationship detected. Harold Smith, the man I'd called Dad my entire life, wasn't my father. Not biologically, anyway. I sat in stunned silence for I don't know how long, staring at the screen and trying to process what this meant. If Harold wasn't my father, and if Violet and I only shared maternal DNA, then everything about our family structure was a lie. More importantly, if we weren't full sisters, then the genetic compatibility that supposedly made me her only suitable blood donor was complete fiction. My phone rang, jarring me out of my shocked paralysis. It was Rebecca Martinez. Mariel, I'm glad I caught you. We've made some significant developments in the investigation, and I need to meet with you as soon as possible. Yes, okay. I actually just received some information that might be relevant too. DNA results? I was surprised she knew. Yes, how did you... We've been conducting our own genetic analysis as part of the investigation. Several of the families involved in Dr. Patterson's research have discovered similar discrepancies. Can you come in this afternoon? 2 hours later, I was sitting in a conference room at the medical center's administrative offices, facing Rebecca Martinez and 2 other investigators. The DNA results were spread out on the table between us,
along with what looked like extensive files and documentation. Mariel, Rebecca began gently, what we are about to tell you is going to be difficult to hear, but you deserve to know the full scope of what's been happening. Is Violet really my half-sister? Yes, that part of your results is accurate, but that's actually the least significant finding. She pulled out a thick folder and opened it to reveal bank statements, financial records, and what looked like receipts. Dr. Patterson's research wasn't just about studying family dynamics and donor psychology. He's been selling the blood he collected from research participants to private medical facilities and cosmetic treatment centers. The room seemed to spin. Selling it? Your blood specifically has been particularly valuable because of your own negative type and the frequency of donations. Over the past 6 months, Dr. Patterson has made approximately $47,000 selling your blood to various buyers. $47,000. I thought about my paycheck from Brewster's, barely $800 every 2 weeks. They'd made more money from my blood in 6 months than I'd earned in 2 years. But why? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Why would my family participate in this? Rebecca exchanged glances with her colleagues. That's where this gets more complicated. Your mother and Violet were receiving compensation for your participation in the program. Compensation? Mariel Smith received $1,500 per month as your guardian in the research program. Violet received $2,000 per month as the supposed patient. The numbers hit me like physical blows. $3,500 a month. For 6 months. Over $20,000 my family had earned by letting a doctor drain my blood twice a week. Did they know? I asked. Did they know about the research, about the blood being sold? We believe so. We found email exchanges between your mother and Dr. Patterson discussing payment schedules and protocol adjustments. Violet's communications suggest she was aware of the financial arrangements from the beginning. I felt nauseous. Not the gentle nausea I'd experienced from anemia, but the gut-wrenching sickness that comes from discovering that people you love have betrayed you in ways you couldn't have imagined. There's more, Rebecca said softly. We need to ask you some questions about your family history, specifically about your biological father. I don't know anything about my biological father. I thought Harold was my father until today. We have reason to believe your mother may have concealed your paternity for reasons related to this arrangement. O-negative blood is extremely valuable, and if Dr. Patterson knew your genetic background, he might have specifically targeted you for recruitment. You think they planned this? From the beginning? We think it's possible that your family has been preparing for something like this for years. The timing of Violet's supposed illness, right after you turned 18 and could legally consent to medical procedures, seems too convenient to be coincidental.
The room was spinning now. I gripped the edges of my chair, trying to anchor myself to something solid. What happens now? I managed to ask. Now we build a case. Dr. Patterson is facing multiple charges, including research fraud, medical misconduct, and trafficking in human biological materials. Your mother and Violet will likely face charges as co-conspirators. And me? You were a victim, Mariel. Nothing about this is your fault. But as I walked out of that conference room, armed with copies of financial records and genetic reports that destroyed everything I'd believed about my family, I couldn't shake the feeling that somehow, I should have known. I should have trusted my instincts when things didn't add up. I should have demanded more answers when the research didn't match Violet's supposed condition. I should have protected myself instead of trying so hard to be the good daughter, the helpful sister, the family hero. That night, I sat in my apartment, surrounded by evidence of my family's betrayal, and realized that the people who had raised me weren't just strangers, they were criminals who had used my love and loyalty to exploit me for profit. The question now wasn't whether I could forgive them. The question was whether I could ever forgive myself for trusting them in the first place.
I waited 3 days after receiving the DNA results before I called Mom. 3 days of pacing my apartment, rehearsing what I would say, and trying to prepare myself for a conversation that would end our relationship forever. When I finally picked up the phone, my hands were steadier than I'd expected. "Mariel, honey." Her voice was bright with false cheer. "How are you feeling? Dr. Patterson called yesterday to check on your recovery progress." The mention of Dr. Patterson, who I now knew was about to be arrested, sent a chill through me. "He called you?" "Just routine follow-up. He's hoping you'll be ready to resume donations next week." Of course he was. Even facing a criminal investigation, he was still trying to squeeze more money out of my blood. "Mom, I need to see you today. There are some things we need to discuss." "Oh, wonderful. I was just thinking the same thing. Violet's been asking about you too. Why don't you come for dinner? I'll make your favorite, chicken parmesan." The casual way she suggested family dinner, as if nothing had changed, as if she hadn't been selling my blood for months, made my stomach turn. But I needed to see her face when I confronted her with the evidence. "I'll be there at 6. "Perfect. Should I tell Violet you're coming?" "Tell whoever you want, Mom. It doesn't matter anymore." I spent the afternoon preparing. I printed copies of the DNA results, the financial records Rebecca had shown me, and the email exchanges between Mom and Dr. Patterson. Everything went into a manila folder that I held like a shield as I drove to the house on Maple Ridge Drive for what I knew would be the last time. The house looked exactly the same as always. Perfectly manicured lawn, seasonal wreath on the door, warm light glowing from the windows. But now it looked like a stage set, a carefully constructed facade hiding something rotten underneath. Mom answered the door wearing her favorite apron, the one with little cherries that she'd worn to every family dinner for as long as I could remember. For a moment, seeing her there looking so normal and maternal, I almost lost my nerve. "There's my girl." She pulled me into a hug that smelled like her familiar lavender perfume and garlic from the kitchen. "You're looking so much better. Your color is coming back." Because I wasn't being drained of a pint of blood twice a week anymore, I thought, but didn't say. "Where's Dad?" I asked as we walked toward the kitchen. "Harold's at his book club. You know how seriously he takes his mystery novel discussions." She laughed the same warm laugh I'd heard my entire life. "And Violet's running a bit late. She had a work meeting that ran over." Work meeting. I wondered if that was code for meeting with a lawyer now that the investigation was heating up. "Mom, let's sit down. I need to talk to you about something important." Her smile faltered slightly, but she maintained her cheerful demeanor. "Of course, sweetie. But can it wait until after dinner? The chicken will be ready soon, and I know how I hate to let food get cold." "No, it can't wait." Something in my tone must have warned her because her expression shifted. The warm maternal mask slipped just enough to reveal something harder underneath. "Mariel, you're scaring me. What's wrong?" I set the manila folder on the kitchen table, the same table where we'd eaten thousands of family meals, where I'd done homework while she cooked, where she'd comforted me through teenage heartbreaks and disappointments. "I got some test results back. DNA results." Mom went very still. "DNA results? Why would you need DNA results?" "Because I wanted to understand why Violet and I were supposedly such perfect genetic matches for blood compatibility. Turns out there's a very simple explanation." I opened the folder and pulled out the first document. "We're half-sisters, Mom. We share maternal DNA, but we have different fathers." Mom sank into her chair, her face going pale. "Mariel, I can explain." "Can you? Can you explain why you told me Harold was my father my entire life when he's not even genetically related to me? Your father... Harold is your father in every way that matters. Biology isn't everything. Biology is everything when it comes to medical compatibility." I pulled out the financial records next. It's also everything when it comes to the value of someone's blood.
The kitchen was silent except for the timer ticking on the oven. Mom stared at the bank statements spread across the table, and I watched 23 years of lies crumble in her expression. "How much did you know?" I asked quietly. "About Dr. Patterson's research, about him selling my blood, about the money you were making off my body." "It wasn't like that." Her voice was barely above a whisper. $1,500 a month, Mom. That's what you made from my participation in his fake research study. While I was working double shifts at a coffee shop to pay rent, you were earning more than my entire salary by letting a doctor drain my blood. The money wasn't the point. Then what was the point? My voice was rising, months of suppressed anger finally breaking free. What was the point of lying about Violet's health? What was the point of making me believe I was saving my sister's life when she was never sick at all? Mom's composure finally cracked. Tears spilled down her cheeks, but I felt no sympathy. Not anymore. "You don't understand the pressure we were under," she said. "Violet's student loans, the mortgage, your father's..." Harold's business was struggling when Dr. Patterson approached us with the opportunity. Opportunity? I slammed my hand on the table. "You call exploiting your own daughter of opportunity?" "He said it was harmless, that the blood donations wouldn't hurt you, that you'd recover quickly, that it was basically like regular blood donation, but more frequent." Twice a week for 6 months, Mom. Double the normal amount each time. I nearly died from anemia. "But you're better now." "I'm better now because I stopped, because Dr. Patterson finally developed a conscience and realized he was killing me." That's when Violet walked in. She stood in the kitchen doorway, still wearing her work clothes, taking in the scene, her mother crying, her half-sister furious, and financial documents spread across the table. Her face went through a series of expressions: surprise, calculation, and finally, resignation. "How much does she know?" Violet asked Mom, as if I weren't sitting right there. "She knows everything. About the DNA, about the money, about your fake illness, all of it." Violet set down her purse and walked over to the table, picking up one of the bank statements with clinical detachment. "You hired a private investigator?" "I filed a complaint with patient advocacy. They investigated. Dr. Patterson is being arrested next week." For the first time since I'd known her, Violet looked genuinely shocked. "Arrested?" "Research fraud, medical misconduct, human trafficking, and you and Mom are being charged as co-conspirators." Mom made a sound like a wounded animal. "Co-conspirators? Mariel, surely you don't want your own family to go to prison." "My own family sold my blood for profit while lying to me about a life-threatening illness. What I want is justice." Violet sat down across from me, her usual confidence completely gone. "Mariel, I know this looks bad, but you have to understand." "Understand what? That you spent 4 years making me feel worthless and invisible and then found a way to literally profit from my body? That you convinced me I was saving your life when you were really just cashing checks?" "The illness wasn't entirely fake," she said desperately. "I was tired, run down. You were tired from staying up late spending the money you made from my blood." "I've seen your social media, Violet. The designer clothes, the expensive restaurants, the weekend trips to Seattle, all funded by my anemia." "Where will you go? What will you do?" The question caught me off guard. In all my anger and hurt, I hadn't thought about the practical implications of severing ties with my family. "I'll figure it out," I said. "People survive without families who exploit them all the time." "We're still your family," Mom pleaded. "Mistakes were made, but we love you." I looked at her, really looked at her, and tried to find some trace of the woman who had raised me, who had packed my school lunches and driven me to soccer practice and held me when I was sick. She was still there, somewhere, underneath the desperation and the lies, but I couldn't reach her anymore. "If this is what your love looks like, I don't want it." I walked toward the door, leaving behind the smell of burning chicken parmesan and 23 years of my life.
Mariel, please, Mom called after me. Don't do this. Don't destroy our family over money. I stopped at the threshold and turned back one last time. I'm not destroying our family, Mom. I'm just finally admitting that it was never real in the first place. The door closed behind me with a soft click, and I walked away from the only home I'd ever known, carrying nothing but the truth and the promise of a future that was finally, completely mine. The first few weeks after the confrontation felt like living in someone else's life. I'd wake up each morning in my cramped studio apartment expecting to feel regret, guilt, or the crushing loneliness that everyone warns comes with cutting off family. Instead, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Peace. Real peace. Not the artificial calm that comes from avoiding conflict or keeping everyone else happy, but the deep, bone-deep peace of finally telling the truth and standing by it. The criminal case moved faster than anyone had expected. Dr. Patterson was arrested on a Wednesday morning, led out of Riverside Medical Center in handcuffs while local news cameras rolled. The story broke that same evening. Local doctor accused of illegal blood trade scheme. I watched the report from my couch, eating takeout Chinese food, and marveling at how clinical it all sounded when reduced to a 30-second news segment.
Rebecca Martinez called the next day to update me on the charges. Dr. Patterson is cooperating fully with investigators. He's provided detailed records of all the families involved, the amounts collected, and where the blood was sold. How many families? I asked. 12 total. You were involved the longest, but there were others. Some for just a few weeks before they figured out something was wrong and stopped participating. I thought about those other families. Parents and siblings who had been smarter than mine, who had asked the right questions or trusted their instincts when things didn't add up. Part of me envied them for escaping so quickly. Another part was grateful that my ordeal had led to exposing the whole operation. What about Mom and Violet? They've been charged as accessories to fraud and conspiracy. Their arraignment is scheduled for next month. Accessories to fraud. The legal language felt inadequate for what they'd done to me, but it was a start. I didn't attend the arraignment. I had no desire to see them in a courtroom, to watch Mom cry or Violet maintain her innocence. Instead, I spent that day doing something I hadn't done in months. I went hiking. Alone. Without checking my phone every 10 minutes to see if anyone needed me, without calculating whether my plans would interfere with anyone else's medical appointments, without asking permission from anyone to live my own life. The trail I chose wound through the Columbia River Gorge, a 3-mile loop that ended at a waterfall. I'd never been much of a hiker before. There had never been time, with work and family obligations and the constant underlying anxiety about Violet's health. But as I walked through the forest, breathing clean air and listening to nothing but birdsong and my own footsteps, I understood for the first time what freedom actually felt like. Halfway through the hike, my phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "This is Violet. I know you don't want to talk to me, but I need you to know I'm sorry. What we did was wrong." I stared at the message for a long time, sitting on a fallen log beside the trail. A few months ago, this apology would have meant everything to me. I would have called her immediately, eager to rebuild our relationship, ready to forgive and forget for the sake of family unity. Now, it just felt empty. Too little, too late, and probably motivated more by her legal troubles than genuine remorse. I deleted the message without responding and continued hiking. Over the following weeks, there were more attempts at contact. Mom called and left voicemails that started angry, "You're being incredibly selfish," and gradually became more desperate. "Please, honey, we can work through this as a family." Harold, who I still thought of as Dad despite everything, sent a handwritten letter explaining that he'd known about my paternity but had loved me as his own daughter anyway. He claimed he'd had no idea about the blood scheme, that he had trusted Mom to handle my medical care. I wanted to believe him. Harold had always been the most decent person in our family, the one who tried to stay out of conflicts and avoid taking sides. But his letter also made it clear that he knew about the monthly payments, that he'd benefited from the extra income, that he'd chosen not to ask questions about where the money was coming from.
Willful ignorance, I'd learned, was its own form of complicity. I threw the letter away unread after the first paragraph. My coworkers at Brewster's were supportive in the awkward way that people are when they don't understand what you're going through, but know it must be terrible. Jake, my coworker who'd covered my shifts during the donation days, brought me coffee and pastries for weeks. I always thought it was weird, he admitted one afternoon during our break, how you had to leave every Tuesday, how tired you looked afterward. But I figured it wasn't my business. It wasn't your business, I assured him, but thank you for noticing that something was wrong. Nobody in my family did. Actually, that wasn't entirely true. They had noticed. They'd just decided that my suffering was acceptable collateral damage for their financial gain. The hardest part wasn't the anger or the betrayal. Those emotions were clean, understandable, justified. The hardest part was the grief. Grieving the family I thought I had, the sister I thought I was saving, the parents I thought loved me unconditionally. I found a therapist, Dr. Sandra Kim, who specialized in family trauma and boundary setting. Our first session was mostly me crying and trying to explain how I could miss people who hurt me so deeply. It's normal to grieve the family you thought you had, she said gently. Even when you know intellectually that they weren't who you thought they were, your heart still mourns the loss of those relationships. Will it always hurt this much? The grief will change. It won't always be this acute. But Mariel, you need to understand that what happened to you wasn't just family dysfunction or poor communication. It was systematic exploitation. They used your love and loyalty against you for profit. That's not something you just get over. Dr. Kim helped me understand that my family had conditioned me over years to prioritize their needs over my own well-being. The blood donations were just the most extreme example of a pattern that had been in place since childhood. Think about it, she said during one session. When was the last time anyone in your family asked what you wanted, what you needed, what your dreams were?
I couldn't remember. Every conversation, every family decision, every major life event had been filtered through what was best for Violet, what would make Mom happy, what would maintain the family's image. With Dr. Kim's help, I started practicing something that felt foreign and uncomfortable, putting myself first. I quit Brewster's and used the money from the Victims' Compensation Fund. Dr. Patterson's assets were being liquidated to pay his victims, to enroll in a graphic design program at Portland Community College. It was something I'd always been interested in but had never pursued because it seemed impractical, selfish, unlikely to lead to the kind of stable job that would let me support my family's needs. Now, for the first time in my life, I was allowed to choose something just because I wanted it. I moved to a better apartment, one with actual windows and enough space for a desk where I could work on design projects. I made friends in my classes, people who knew nothing about my family or my history, who liked me for who I was, rather than what I could do for them. And slowly, gradually, I began to understand what it felt like to live as myself, rather than as an extension of other people's needs and expectations. The victim's compensation hearing was scheduled for 6 months after Dr. Patterson's arrest. I would have to face a judge, describe what had been done to me, and quantify the damage in dollars and medical costs. Rebecca Martinez assured me that I didn't have to attend if I didn't feel ready. I'll be there, I told her. I want them to see what they did to me, and I want other victims to know that speaking up is worth it. Because that's what I'd finally learned. My voice mattered. My health mattered. My choices mattered. And anyone who tried to convince me otherwise, family or not, didn't deserve a place in my life. The night before the hearing, I got one last text from Mom. I know you hate us now, but we're still your family. That has to count for something. I read it twice, then blocked her number. Family wasn't about shared DNA or childhood history or obligation. It was about respect, honesty, and genuine care for each other's well-being. By that definition, the people who had raised me had never been my family at all. But the life I was building now, with friends who supported my dreams, a career path I'd chosen freely, and boundaries that protected my health and happiness, that felt like home in a way that House on Maple Ridge Drive never had. Tomorrow, I would walk into that courtroom as myself. Not as Violet's sister, not as mom's daughter, not as anyone's obligation or responsibility or source of income. Just as Mariel. And for the first time in my life, that felt like more than enough. 2 years later, I'm sitting in my design studio, a converted garage space I rent in Southeast Portland, putting the finishing touches on a client's wedding invitation suite. The morning light streams through the skylights I had installed last spring, illuminating watercolor samples and font selections spread across my drafting table. My business, Meridian Design Co., has grown beyond anything I imagined when I first enrolled in those community college classes. The irony isn't lost on me that I'm designing invitations for a couple's celebration of love and commitment, given how thoroughly my understanding of both concepts was shattered. But there's something healing about creating beautiful things for people who are choosing each other freely, honestly, with full knowledge of who they're committing to. My phone buzzes with a text from Elena, my girlfriend of 8 months. Coffee later? I want to hear about your client meeting with the museum. Elena teaches art therapy at a nonprofit downtown, working with survivors of various forms of abuse and exploitation. We met at a community art show where I was displaying some personal work, a series of pieces about identity, family, and finding yourself after betrayal. She understood the deeper meaning behind the abstract forms and color choices in ways that caught me off guard. Our relationship is nothing like what I thought love looked like in families. There's no manipulation, no hidden agendas, no sacrificing of one person's well-being for the other's benefit. When Elena needs support, she asks directly. When I need space, I say so clearly. We choose each other every day, not out of obligation or guilt, but because we genuinely enjoy building a life together. The museum project she's referring to is something I never would have had the confidence to pursue before. The Oregon Museum of Science and Industry wants to create an interactive exhibit about medical ethics, and they've asked me to design the visual materials. It's the kind of work that feels meaningful, using my skills to help educate people about informed consent and patient rights. Part of the exhibit will feature real stories from people who experienced medical exploitation. I've been asked to share my story as part of the display, though I haven't decided yet whether I'm ready for that level of public exposure. The victim's compensation hearing 2 years ago resulted in a settlement that covered my medical expenses, lost wages, and punitive damages. Dr. Patterson received a 10-year prison sentence. Mom and Violet each got 2 years, though Mom was released early for good behavior. Violet served her full sentence. Apparently, she never mastered the art of appearing remorseful to parole boards the way she had perfected performing illness for me. I know this because Rebecca Martinez sends me periodic updates, not because I've sought out information about their lives. I blocked all their phone numbers, social media accounts, and email addresses. I've built what Dr. Kim calls fortress boundaries, complete protection from any attempt at renewed contact.
About 6 months ago, Harold tried to reach me through my business website, sending a message through the contact form since all other avenues were blocked. His message was brief. Mariel, I know I don't deserve forgiveness, but I want you to know I think about you every day, and I'm proud of the woman you've become. I hope you're happy. I read it several times, surprised by how little emotion it stirred. Not anger, not sadness, not longing, just a kind of distant acknowledgement. Harold had been the most passive participant in my exploitation. But passive participation was still participation. Good intentions didn't erase the harm caused by willful blindness. I didn't respond to his message, but I didn't delete it either. It sits in my business email folder, a reminder of the complicated truth that people can love you and still fail you in fundamental ways. My actual family now consists of Elena, my close friends from design school, Dr. Kim, who I still see monthly for maintenance sessions, and surprisingly, some of the other victims from Dr. Patterson's scheme. We formed an informal support group that meets quarterly, sharing updates on our healing journeys and advocating for stronger patient protection laws. Marcus Chen, who was in the program for 3 months before his daughter convinced him something was wrong, has become something like a father figure to me. His wife Linda bakes cookies for our group meetings, and they've invited me to their family gatherings with a warmth that never comes with strings. You choose your real family, Linda told me at their daughter's graduation party last year. Blood might create biological connections, but love creates family.
The most surprising development in my new life has been my relationship with my biological father. The DNA test had identified several Rodriguez relatives, and through them, I eventually connected with Antonio Rodriguez, a carpenter in Sacramento who had no idea I existed. Our first phone conversation was awkward and emotional. He and Mom had dated briefly when she was separated from Harold during the early marriage, something I'd never known about. When they got back together, she never told either man about the pregnancy. I always wondered, Antonio said during one of our video calls, your mom seemed different that last month we were together, secretive. But when she went back to Harold, I figured it was for the best. Antonio is nothing like Harold. Where Harold was passive and intellectual, Antonio is warm and direct. He has 3 other children, my half-siblings, who welcomed me into their family with an openness that still surprises me. We're planning a visit this summer, my first time meeting them in person. You know what strikes me about your story, Dr. Kim said during our last session? How you've managed to transform trauma into purpose, isolation into connection, exploitation into advocacy. The advocacy part has become increasingly important to me. I speak at medical conferences now, educating healthcare providers about recognizing signs of coercion in donation situations. I've testified before the state legislature in support of stronger informed consent protocols. I've even been interviewed for a documentary about medical exploitation that will air next year. Each time I tell my story, it gets a little easier. Not because the pain diminishes, but because I learned to separate my worth from what happened to me. I am not defined by being a victim. I'm defined by what I chose to do after I discovered the truth. The hardest lesson I've learned is that love without respect isn't love at all. It's control wearing love's costume. Real love doesn't ask you to sacrifice your health, your dreams, or your sense of self. Real love doesn't come with hidden costs or secret agendas. Real love sees you as a complete person worthy of honesty, safety, and choice. If you're reading this and recognizing patterns in your own family, the subtle manipulation, the guilt trips disguised as love, the expectation that you sacrifice your well-being for others, I want you to know that you deserve better. You deserve relationships built on mutual respect and genuine care. You deserve to be valued for who you are, not what you can provide. It took me 23 years to learn that walking away from toxic people isn't betrayal. It's self-preservation. It isn't selfish. It's necessary. It isn't giving up on love. It's making space for the real thing. My scar from the blood donations faded years ago, barely visible now unless you know exactly where to look. But the boundaries I learned to build, the voice I learned to use, the life I learned to choose for myself, those are permanent. Those are the real gifts that came from surviving my family's betrayal. I still have moments of grief, particularly around holidays or milestones, when the absence of a traditional family feels most acute. But I've learned that grief is love with nowhere to go, and I'd rather grieve the loss of something that was never real than continue living a lie. Tonight, Elena and I are cooking dinner together in the kitchen of our shared apartment. We're planning a weekend trip to visit the Chen family, and I'm working on designs for a nonprofit that helps other exploitation survivors rebuild their lives. This is what happiness looks like. Ordinary moments with people who choose to know you fully and love you freely. No performances, no hidden costs, no sacrificial requirements. Just the simple, revolutionary act of living as yourself, surrounded by people who believe that's not only enough, it's everything. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.